So good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining us for this National Sea Grant Law Center webinar. My name is Stephanie Otts. I'm the director of the National Sea Grant Law Center, which is based at the University of Mississippi School of Law. We really appreciate everyone joining us today. So Catherine Janessi, one of our senior research attorneys here at the Law Center, is going to be sharing a lot of more information about this project and our overall goals. But first, I have some introductory information to share and some housekeeping. So first, just for anyone in the audience that might not be familiar with the National Sea Grant Law Center, we were founded in 2002. We're one of the 34 Sea Grant programs around the country. And our mission is to conduct legal research, education, and outreach for the wider Sea Grant network and their constituents. So if you're interested in our work and what else we do, I encourage you to visit our website. You can use the QR code there to navigate to the website, or you can follow us on social media as well. So just the basic housekeeping. We do have everyone on mute right now to cut down on background noise. Please stay on mute to help us with that. The webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with everyone who registered following the webinar. So if you have colleagues or others that might be interested and weren't able to attend again, they will have the opportunity to watch the recording. You may use the chat at any time to ask questions. We'll try to answer them as we see them, but there will also be dedicated time for Q&A later on in the webinar. And if you have any, technical issues, we can't promise that we can help with that, but you can private chat Lauren Fremen, who is the National Sea Grant Law Center's project coordinator, and she can help if she's able to. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to get the presentation started.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining. So we, wanted to start off today to just acknowledge our funding for this project. So we were funded by Purdue University and NOAA through Indiana-Illinois Sea Grant's bigger Great Lakes PFAS project, some of which some of you may have been on their scoping part of that project previously. And so we're one of the four research projects that was funded through that competition that they ran. And then our partners on this project are Minnesota Sea Grant and Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. They're going to be helping us with the outreach portion of this project. And we'll talk more about that outreach later on in the webinar. And so, as many of you know, research is showing that PFAS are pervasive in the environment. And in response to that, the federal and state governments across the country have begun to enact or in the process of developing laws and regulations to address PFAS contamination. Many programs are emerging in the Great Lakes region, as I'm sure many of you are aware, but those policy goals and standards are inconsistent. And so the object of our project is to lay some groundwork to advance regional consensus in the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain regions when it comes to PFAS regulation. And so the states that we're focusing on for this project are Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Wisconsin.
Yep. And so we wanted to share a little bit kind of about the approach that the National Sea Grant Law Center has taken and our philosophy behind our project. So for several years, the National Sea Grant Law Center has been using an approach that we refer to as building consensus to develop policy consensus around various ocean, coastal, or Great Lakes issues, including invasive species and seaweed food safety. So when we say building consensus, we're referring to a collaborative learning process whereby key players in policy development are brought together to engage in facilitated discussions with the goal to reach agreement or consensus on aspects of an existing policy dispute or question. The National Sea Grant Law Center then works with the project participants to develop resources or tools such as policy briefs or model language that can help support legal reform efforts to move towards that consensus. And we also conduct outreach on the research findings and those resources that have been developed to increase awareness of the issues and knowledge of the existing legal framework. And so in this project, we're seeking to adapt this building consensus project with the hope that the research that we share through the course of this project will lead to robust conversations and more regional consensus related to some aspects of PFAS regulation.
So our project has three main objectives that we're going to use to hopefully build that groundwork for policy consensus. In each of these objectives, we have worked in our planning to have state regulators involved to help us get through this process to make sure that we are hitting the right objectives and goals and doing the right kind of research that is useful. So objective number one is to conduct a legal scan for each of the states in the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain region that's related to PFAS contamination to identify and compile the relevant provisions. The second step is a comparative analysis. So here we are going to try to analyze the different legal approaches adopted in the Great Lakes, as well as other regions in the country, to show us a range and differences in the policy tools that different states have taken towards PFAS. And then finally, we are going to develop 2 to 3 case studies of state action to address PFAS contamination. And this is going to help us explore policy challenges and legal risks as well. And so, as I mentioned, our project has a lot of places for state regulatory engagement, as both the scoping and our project proposal, identified state regulators as the primary end user group for this type of research. And so we worked with our partner sea grant programs to develop a list of key PFAS regulators for each state in the region. And we built upon those contacts that they built during that scoping for the bigger project in the Great Lakes. And so we have several different ways that we want regulators to be involved in this project. So the first is today's kickoff webinar. So again, thank you all for joining to learn more about the project. Second, we're going to have review and feedback opportunities. And so we want to share drafts of the compilation, the comparative analysis, and the case studies for your review and feedback. And then finally, we are planning to have 3 to 4 virtual engagements later on in the project. So likely either the fall or winter coming up in the next year for state regulators to provide the opportunities for them, for you all to learn from each other and to discuss the research results. And so step one is going to be a legal scan. And so we're going to start our project by identifying the extent of which each of the 9 states in the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain regions have taken legislative or regulatory action to address PFAS contamination. We think that's essential first step for understanding the state of PFAS regulation in the region. When our project was reviewed, some of the review comments had mentioned that previously other entities have done legal scans on PFAS regulation. And so as a first step of that process, we had a law student review previous sources that had done just that. And so that was a starting point for our legal research. But because those databases may not be as comprehensive of what we're looking to find, so maybe some of the laws and regulations that were compiled were only on specific types of regulations, maybe only legislative actions, or they may be out of date, because as we know, laws and regulations are being adopted all the time to address PFAS. We are now in the process of doing our own legal scan to help fill in any gaps to account for new legislation or et cetera for that. We're also going to add a search of a state case law to identify the impact, if any, of judicial programs on state programs to address PFAS contamination. So those the case law searches are going to focus specifically on lawsuits that are challenging state authority to regulate PFAS. We think that will be a helpful way to kind of give us a bigger view of the landscape of PFAS regulation in the region. And we plan on including summaries of those opinions as an appendix to the compilation of laws that we're going to compile. And then finally, we are also going to be tracking federal, tribal, and Canadian provisions through this process. The federal piece, is important, especially when we think about federal actions that are going to spur state action. So specifically thinking about the drinking water regulation that was just finalized by the EPA. And then with the Canadian and tribal governments, recognizing that in this region, their state governments aren't the only regulators. And so taking a look to see what those other entities have been doing to regulate PFAS in the region. And then once we compile all the relevant provisions and case summaries, we're planning on sending them to the state contacts for review. We think that's critical because we want to know if we're accurate in what we found, if there's any agency policies or guidance that are not readily identifiable in legal databases that may be important for us to include. And so we think it's important for you all to do that review for us, and so we can incorporate any changes that need to be made into that final compilation. And so the Law Center has been doing a similar legal scan in other parts of the region. And so here we just wanted to show you kind of a snapshot of what we were capturing in that research. And so if you can give us even any feedback about what you think we're doing and if we're on the right track. So this slide is showing a chart where we're looking at enacted legislation. So we're compiling what the name of the bill was, the year it was passed, what PFAS specifically were addressed by the action, recognizing that not all legislation is going to be addressing PFAS as a whole, looking at what agencies are responsible to take the action under the legislation, providing a quick summary of what that action was, and then finally, where in the statutes the provisions are going to be ultimately codified at. And then as another step, we're also looking at other types of state actions that could be taken. So we have a similar chart as we just showed you for regulations with statutes, but then we also wanted to look at some other state actions that have been being taken. So have there been any executive orders that have been issued in the state? What kind of outreach are they doing on state websites? Have there been any kind of guidance documents, planning efforts in the state, or any other kind of research that the state has sponsored and completed that's out there for us? And so again, if you have any thoughts on kind of what we should be looking for in this legal scan, if we're looking for the right things, if we're missing anything, definitely we're welcome to feedback from you all about if we're kind of on the right track with this step of the process. And so objective 2 is the comparative analysis. And so here we're going to be looking at the compiled state statutes, regulations, and policies to look at the range of different approaches that the states have taken, as well as trying to see, okay, what are the similarities, differences, and gaps among the states' chosen policy regimes. It's also going to include states that have been examined as in other parts of our research. So Amy Kreichman, who's on the call with us, is our law fellow. She's been working for us at looking at states and other regions and what they have done for PFAS. And so we think that will allow us to not only kind of compare what's going on in the Great Lakes region, but then allow us to look, okay, this is what's happening in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. And we can compare all those different attributes. So this part is going to have two different steps for us to get through this comparative analysis. And so the first is to identify key policy regime categories and characteristics. And then second, review what we've compiled to determine how those categories or characteristics are addressed in each state. And so there's a wide range of policy regime characteristics that we could pick from. Some of them are simple, like the ones we've captured in that table. So, the date of enactment, the state of purpose, the implementing agencies. And then there's other characteristics that are more complex. So what strategies are being used, who's going to be affected by the legislation, what are the policy tools being used. And so for that part where we're looking to see what characteristics we're going to include in the matrix itself, we're going to be looking for input from the state regulators again to see if we're on the right track about what we're trying to compare at that step. And then we're going to share the results of the comparative analysis through a narrative report, and as well as a companion matrix table that's going to actually provide a summary of all the comparisons that we've done. And for that step of the process, again, we're going to be looking for a smaller group of 5 to 6 people from either our partner sea grant programs or other, some agency contacts to provide feedback on that report as well. And so finally, the last step is to develop 2 to 3 case studies. And so we think that this is going to be a useful way to illustrate the broader or overarching themes, ideas related to the particular policy problems that we're seeing with PFAS. We're going to pick these subjects based on the research findings from the comparative analysis, as well as, again, the input that we've gotten from our sea grant partners and the state regulators. Potential candidates for the case studies could be innovative state legal approaches to regulating PFAS, legal risks associated with state regulation, or specific lawsuits that are happening in the region. Each case study is going to have a standard structure. We'll have an executive summary, a background information on the legal landscape, discussion of the policy approach or challenge, and then a conclusion. We're going to try to touch on those specific characteristics that we highlighted in the matrix. And again, we'll be asking for review from our sea grant partners and state agency contacts as well to see if we're, again, on the right track with this step of the project. And so then finally, we have an outreach aspect of the project. And here's where we're going to be partnering with Minnesota Sea Grant and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, as well as an undergraduate intern who will be working with us at the Law Center. And so that team is going to try to translate and share findings from the compilation, comparative analysis, the case studies for a non-legal audience. So we can be able to share it to a greater audience than those who just know technical jargon and those types of things. So we'll be looking to try to share it with policymakers, researchers, industry representatives, community organizations, and others. We have a particular focus on trying to reach underserved and underrepresented individuals and communities in the regions. And then depending on input we receive, the products can be a wide range of things, including fact sheets, online content for websites or social media, or other kind of outreach materials that we think will be the most useful and effective in sharing what we found in this project. So we've been talking for a little bit now. We wanted to have time to see if at this point anybody has any questions about any aspect of the project.
Yeah, and you can use the chat, or we have a small group, so you can most likely come off of mute, and we have a little more engagement that we want to do after this section. So you might have more questions that come to you, but we just wanted to take a break now and see if anyone had questions. Okay. All right. Thanks. And like, again, as we continue to go on, the chat is always there. So feel free to ask questions. So now, as Kathy said, we had been spending a lot of time talking with you. And before we go, Kathy, I just saw a question pop up. So is the legal review limited to actions in place or actions proposed?
So right now in the legal scan, we are capturing proposed actions. And so particularly Amy, when she's been starting her research, has been finding that there's, often some action that's been proposed in a state multiple times. And so we are at this point capturing those that have been proposed as well as the ones that have been enacted.
Yeah, and some of those other actions that Kathy mentioned, Amy has also been finding that there may be some research being conducted by a state agency that could be feeding in to proposals for regulatory action or fish consumption advisories. So we've been trying to capture those when it's clear that some proposal is underway. Thanks. Great question. Okay. All right, so now we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to navigate out of this presentation and come over to Poll Everywhere because we want to get some of your impact. And we're going to start out with kind of simple questions to get participants navigated to the, kind of familiar with the polling, and then the questions will get slightly more engaging as we go on. But there's a couple of different ways that participants can answer the questions. If you are on a computer and want to navigate to the website, you can type in the address at the top, this pollev.com/SOTS549. Lauren is also going to drop that link into the chat, so you can do that. But you can also do it by text, following the directions at the top. There's also a QR code that will take you there. And if you are just overwhelmed by the options and don't want to do that, feel free to drop your answers into the chat. But we wanted to start with this simple question about whether your specific department has taken regulatory action on PFAS, just to, get a general sense of the level of activity across the region. And again, to get people familiar, with the software. So yeah, so we've gotten at least one response so far. So we'll give it a few minutes before going on to the more, I'm sure, interesting questions. So don't stress if we move on and you didn't have a chance to do this. Oh, good. Responses are coming in. When we go to the next question, it should move for you if you're on the website, but you may need to refresh when we get there. Okay. So thanks everyone who voted so far. And so just we'll move on to the next question, which is now we're, trying to get at if you answered Yes, in the previous question, what type of action has it been? Is it, legislation? Has your agency issued a regulation? Maybe your state has an executive order, or a health or fish consumption advisory, or maybe something else. Yeah. So a little bit of everything, which is what we thought. So Kathy, we might have to circle back to other since since there's no way
Yeah.
to write in like what your other is, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
helpful for us. Yeah.
there's a couple comments coming in that one, it was confusing because we issue non-regulatory advisories to the first question. And then for a second observation is they wish they could have picked more than one because
Oh,
they've
yeah.
taken multiple steps.
So thank you. And that's really good feedback. This is like our first time kind of trying polling. So we'll have to look at the settings because yeah, it would have made sense to let everyone pick more than one. Yep. Okay. Good. Right. Well, hopefully, so the next questions are more open-ended. And again, continue to use the chat. We appreciate that. So thanks. And it's good to kind of see the range of actions on this. So for this one, we just wanted to, give away. We know it can be hard to come off mute on a call and kind of share your thoughts. But as we're kind of starting this project, and as Kathy was talking about, we'll be doing case studies. Kind of curious if you've encountered particular challenges that it's good to be aware of or could potentially be the foundation for a case study. Yeah, meeting expectations. That's, yeah, it might be higher than what agencies can deliver. Okay. Yeah, risk-based standards for things beyond drinking water. Yeah. Great. Thanks. These are all interesting. This is great. Thanks so much. Kathy, there's so many things. My head's spinning. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks you for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll be keeping these notes. And as Kathy mentioned, we have lots of, planned engagements. And so a lot of what you're sharing right now is going to be really valuable as we start to think about case studies or where we should be looking, like what should be included in the analysis. So it looks like the answers are slowing down a little bit, so we can move on to our final question, which might be a little challenging for everyone since you may just now be first hearing about the project. You might not have been involved in the Illinois-Indiana scoping project. But we were curious from what you've heard today and the type of analysis that we're doing, what would be some things that you might like to see out of this project, or maybe not you personally, but as a potential outcome for the work. Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, I think it'll be really valuable to learn from other states and just raising that awareness, right? That you may all be facing very similar things. And Kathy, I lost the chat when I was toggling. I don't know if there's other things
Yeah,
coming in.
nothing has come through the chat.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, again, thank you for all these comments. They're really helpful.
Yeah, and we did not share them in our presentation because we're not the researchers on the other projects, but Kathy mentioned there are 3 other projects funded by Illinois Indiana Sea Grant through that competition, and we've all been connected. And so I think a lot of the comments related to data and information things developing, we're also, interested in learning from those other research teams about what they're working on and exploring, some of these barriers to translating research into policy. Yeah. Right. Well, thanks so much. And you can continue to keep typing. It should stay open even as I start to exit out, but really appreciate everyone's engagement in the polling and being open to providing input this way and trying something that's new for the Law Center. And yeah, they're still coming in. This is great. I'm going to navigate back. Like I said, it should stay open. If it shut that down right now, we're going to be sending a link out to the group afterwards. So we also, if you have any other questions, you can put them in the chat. Kathy can let me know if something comes in, but again, thank you all for joining us. As we mentioned at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded and we will share a link with everyone who registered as soon as it's available. We will also leave the polling kind of open or activated for a little while to provide an opportunity for those who weren't able to make it today to contribute their thoughts. So if they are able to watch the recording, they can, answer right along as you guys did in real time. But definitely please reach out to us at any time if you have questions, ideas, information to share. As Kathy mentioned, we've been working to develop a kind of directory of PFAS contacts in the region. And so that's kind of how we initially reached out to all of you to invite you to attend today. But if you have colleagues or others that you think should be part of this effort, we welcome suggestions on who to include in our communication lists. And we hope to get to know many of you in the coming months as this project moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and thanks again for participating. And yep, just watching the chat to see if any last things come in, but really appreciate everyone being here today. Thank you. All right, Lauren. Well, I think we're good. Thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate it.